Hey y'all, my name is Katie. I met you all last week giving my Chapter 9 presentation on communication, and this week I'm going to be talking to you about my research paper. I'm a little flustered. I just got done dealing with a stolen phone situation with one of my students, so bear with me. So, diving right in, 6 to 8 minutes is not a lot of time. My research paper was on communication barriers within the workplace. And so, as you can imagine, there are several communication barriers that occur within the workplace. And so, in my research paper, I talked about a lot of different ones and, how they affect the workplace and ways that employees can overcome those barriers. And so, I'm just going to step right into it. So, my first barrier was language barriers. So, I was talking specifically about communication barriers, different languages that people have within the workplace. And so, I used my school experience as the perfect example because we have a lot of students here that are from Mexico, we have students from Puerto Rico, we have students from Russia, and so our language is very different. As you can imagine, Russian language is very harsh toned, and we don't often speak like that a lot in America, and so those communication barriers can create serious rifts within our school environment. Luckily, we are fortunate that we have translators here at school, and they're able to step in and kind of filter through that communication and help us. But if they're not here, it really causes a lot of issues and troubles because we don't know how to communicate, and so it can really just break up the way that we communicate with each other, which can lead that person to a lot of frustration because you're not understanding what they're saying or they're not understanding what you're saying, and it really can become difficult. So that was the first barrier that I talked about. The second one was a lack of understanding. And what I mean by a lack of understanding is it's the idea that when you're directing someone, when you're leading someone, when you're communicating with someone, you should always do it in a way that all parties are able to understand. And so you can't, say something and just assume that people understand what you're talking about. You have to elaborate. You have to communicate with your employees what it is that you're trying to say. It's important for supervisors and employers not to overexert their power. This can come off as very standoffish and like you want to have just complete power, and people are really turned off by that, and it makes it really easy for you to lose your audience. Just because you're a person in power doesn't mean that the people you're in charge of should feel belittled. Basically that concept, it's not something that you want to do within the work environment. It can create a lot of mistrust and just kind of, I don't know what the right words are, but it can really break up relationships within the workplace. One of the other barriers that I talked about was nonverbal cues and nonverbal communication. This can be a barrier because within nonverbal communication, it's a lot of body language. And I think I talked about that, in my Chapter 9 presentation. Oftentimes we speak with our body language rather than our words. And this can be a huge communication barrier because you may mean something in a positive way, but your language may be saying it in a negative way. And so it creates that barrier because the person that you're communicating with isn't really understanding what it is that you're trying to say. And so it creates that barrier between employee and customer, or an employee, and makes it hard for you to truly understand what that person is trying to say. It makes it difficult for you to perceive what it is that they're saying. With nonverbal communication, another thing that I focused on in my research was oftentimes people, they might witness something, but then they say nothing about it. And that can be a barrier as well. If you see something, you should always say something. And nonverbal communication can focus in on that realm where you just don't say anything because you feel like it's not your place or whatever. But it is always important, if you feel like you should say something, that you should. Inconsistency was another one that I focused on. I think inconsistency is one of the biggest ones. You should always, as a supervisor especially, send the same message among employee to employee. There are supervisors and managers out there who will tell one person something, then tell another person something else, and then another person something else. And that is a really big hindrance and barrier within the workplace in regards to communication, because it creates a mistrust among employees because they're not able to decipher who's telling the truth? Why did he tell you this and then he told me this, or why did she tell you this and then she told me something different? It makes it very difficult for employees to work in unity together. Listening was another really big one, and as you can imagine, listening is probably the most important. Sometimes it's important just to sit back and listen to what people have to say. In order for the overall organization to function in a very peaceful manner, it's important to listen to the people that you work with. Sometimes you may not see things from their perspective, but it is important to listen. You may not agree with what they have to say, but you should listen to them. That can be really hard. I know I struggle with that. I like to just jump in and force my opinion on people sometimes, and you can't do that. You have to really sit back and just listen to what people have to say. It's important to maintain a level of formal communication across the company. You have to make your message understood, but you have to do it in a way that people will respect and that people will comprehend and understand what it is that you're trying to say. You don't want to be overbearing or too forceful, because then you just lose your audience altogether, like I said at the beginning. For my research, I did a lot of digging on books, journals, websites. I filtered through a lot of research and focused in on those specific barriers that I just mentioned. And for future research for myself, I would really like to see more specific workplace research done. There was a lot of research on like nursing and the medical field, but as an educator, I would really like to see more research focused in on the education realm, or really anywhere else, just to see how those communication barriers affect different workplaces. In the nursing field, it was very informative, but it was also kind of obvious. Obviously, you're encountering several different people from different races, different genders, just different countries, different religions, and so those communication barriers are very evident and very obvious. So for future research, obviously, I would like to see more specific research or more specific workplaces mentioned. But that is kind of my research paper in a gist. Like I said, 6 to 8 minutes is not a very long time. And so I'm going to cut it off, but I just wanted to present that to you and say that I just really look forward to your research and what you have to say and learning from you. And I would love to send you my research paper if you're actually interested in reading more and learning more about anything that I mentioned. So just have a great evening and take care, and God bless.